Resuming the meeting, I'm advised that the first thing we need to do, having moved to receive late submissions, is actually move to receive all of the other submissions as well. So I seem to have lost my, there we go. So I move that we receive all submissions received on the draft Regional Public Transport Plan. Would someone like to second that, please? Okay, all in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? It's unanimous. All right, so that means that we are into active transport. All right. Yep. All right, so Katie, you've prepared a paper on this topic. Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, I would. I just wanted to obviously take the item as read, but to introduce the point. I know that in the actions from last meeting, it was that the Regional Council present two options based on what was discussed. We since then went to our regional TAG group, heard from the TAG group and felt that it was really important to go back a step, look at the issue that we were faced with, and how we would solve that rather than going to the problem or the solution, before we look at the problem. So just to point out that what is in this report is based on building it properly from the ground up, based on Waka Kotahi Ministry of Transport guidelines, knowing that what we're doing at a TAG level is not sufficient in representation of all modes at this point, and that we need to do that first to make sure that we're reporting as officers across all modes and all outcomes to the RTC to then be governed appropriately. We haven't found it our place to then decide what external committee or group might advise the RTC externally. So I thought I'd just make that point. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
So essentially, officers are in agreement with most of you around the table in that there needs to be representation of all modes at this committee, without a doubt. And traditionally, that probably hasn't been as strong in walking and cycling traditionally as other modes. How you achieve that, obviously, is a decision for you. We have discussed previously having a non-voting member on this committee. That can be done with a change to the terms of reference that can be recommended to the chair of the HBRC for the next triennium as they're establishing committees. We have not gone so far as to determine who that representation should be. If there is, and I'm stepping slightly into this because I know where you're all at, that any establishment or any involvement of multimodal or active transports on this committee needs to be representative of the community broadly and cannot be a committee of, or should not be a committee of council.
All right. Well, I'm going to take some questions. The question I would like Katie just to share a little bit more around is the paragraph 20, the work stream approach of the TAG from this point and opportunities for active transport interest groups or committees as may be proposed to participate in that.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Williams. Chair, I just wanted to highlight that how this came about. We went inward at the TAG group meeting to look at how we work on regional transport. It's become very apparent in the last couple of cycles, in the last couple of quarters, that we weren't reporting efficiently or sufficiently on the RLTP activities, which brought us into the question of how do we work our committee process and our agenda. We worked out that the time we had wasn't enough, that it really needed to be a full day, and this came about in discussion of our road safety outcomes from the Section 17A review as well. And so it was determined that the way we manage roading has changed so significantly in the last, many years, but very, very specifically in the last year. And that we needed to have a full day agenda with work streams, the work streams being very specific to the modes and the outcomes that are set to us. Not obviously the modes aren't set, but the outcomes are set by the Ministry of Transport, obviously, and then the vision and purpose set by Waka Kotahi. So the agenda would be much like and guided by the Transport Special Interest Group structure, which is a national level group, and that is structured really well. There's focus on travel demand management, active transport, special groups on speed management, road safety, public transport. And so then you're able to focus in and have the right people. So currently what we have is transport managers from each territorial authority, representatives of Waka Kotahi, and then we have a number of members of the staff from Hawke's Bay Regional Council, but that doesn't come through from the territorial authorities. Usually it's one or two. And so we weren't covering all topics and with that level of expertise that is required. So the idea of the work stream is that throughout a whole day of an agenda, you could attend all of them if it was appropriate for your position, or you could attend the ones that are specific. So, for example, active modes, it could mean that people within their organisations that had the specific both planning and engineering, it doesn't have to just be engineering. And we made that a good point here, that that has developed so much so significantly since the last few years. It's not just about the engineering, it's about the planning as well. So very important for us to make sure that we cross both of those and have good representation outside of the territorial authorities as well. I've got mention here of Te Whatu Ora, Sport Hawke's Bay. I put Bike On, probably better to say Bike Hawke's Bay from what we've heard from Darren earlier today. And that's inclusive of many more, obviously. It's really important that I reiterate the step towards a one network framework from Waka Kotahi, the way that we allocate priorities to roading corridors, whether it's for public transport, active transport, freight, that is going to influence how our funding for infrastructure is navigated in the next few years, especially the next financial cycle. So it's just very important for us to address this all as one network, but with different levels of expertise. So that's the reasoning behind the work streams.
So if there were a community-appointed committee of folk passionate about active transport, they could attend as a sort of reference group, the work streams to do with active transport.
Absolutely.
And at the moment, we've got advisory members around this table from all modes of transport other than walking and cycling.
Correct.
Right, okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Kerr.
I like the sound of this new structure and new time frame that allows work on these different work streams. Thinking about transport in the future and how it fits within climate change, emissions reduction, carbon neutral transport, is that also going to be able to be encompassed within this new framework?
Yes, it will be. Thank you, Councillor Kerr. So I think it is in my Transport Manager's report. I have a very high-level draft visualised sort of terms of reference for the TAG group, in that all modes cross all outcomes, and one outcome, for example, is emissions reduction. So we have Road to Zero or Vision Zero, emissions reduction, inclusive access, economic development, and network resilience as being our 5 key outcomes. And that all modes need to cross and consider all of those. And so that is the way that we need to manage ourselves as a TAG group, that no mode or outcome is lost in the way that we manage ourselves and report accordingly.
Brilliant, thank you.
Councillor Price.
Just to clarify, what Martin just said was they do have a lifeline to get to the Road Transport Committee, because I think that's what they feel they haven't got. And then they'll be able to speak at meetings but can't vote. Is that right, if they set this group up?
So that would be subject to a change to the terms of reference of this committee to be considered by the chair of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council for the incoming triennium. As the Regional Council establishes the next round of committees following elections, they will need to review all the terms of reference for committees. It is the responsibility of the Regional Council to establish the Road Transport Committee, the Regional Transport Committee. That's a bit of a faux pas. I'll have to pay for that one.
Rail transport.
So what Katie and I are suggesting is that we would, you could recommend as part of this to alter the terms of reference to enable a member of a recognised community group or something, I don't know the words, to hold a non-voting position at this council. at this table.
Can we put that down as an action point?
That's weird.
Yes, I'm going to do better than that. I've got a
Thank you.
resolution in mind when we get to it.
Well, no, I'll step back again.
That's right. Linda?
Can I just clarify then, so that would be like an advisory member, is that what you're?
Correct.
Yeah, okay,
Thank
perfect.
you.
Councillor Van Dyke?
I'm a bit baffled. We have been coming to this group, and I'm sitting here as a representative of the regional cycling governance group that normally Graham would be representing on this table. And so we as a group actually came and voiced that there was no outcome as to that particular group. All we were doing was listening to reports, had no input in any change, and so we actually requested that that actually was going to be looked at. I don't see it, because we asked for an active transport committee right across the Rohe, and we had a workshop on that on the War Memorial, and it more or less was agreed upon that that actually was going to be put in place, and that particular group would then be represented here, either as an advisory or as a voting. And for us, the bottom line is voting. You know, this is so important. You know, we're talking about climate change. I'm not even talking about climate change. I'm talking about health. Look at our weight. We are one of the heaviest people on earth from New Zealand because we love our cars so much. This is not just about climate change. This is about a whole lot of other reasons why we actually want to have active transport added to this particular committee, because it ain't happening. You know, several of us on the regional cycling governance group are on the active transport committee in Hastings. It's the only committee that actually exists. And when I listen there, and some of my colleagues listen to what is being proposed by staff who are specialists in this area, baffles me that they're still very focused on the motor car and road transport. So therefore, we felt that we actually really needed to get a voice and have change. And I don't see that actually in this paper, to be honest.
Yeah, I think there was supposed to be a question in there.
I can hear the question. I think I can hear the question.
There is an absolute
My
question.
answer to
Where is
that
it?
is,
Where is it? Yeah.
so my answer to that is that everyone around this table has a responsibility and a duty to all modes. They are at this table as a regional transport committee member, not for roads, not for walking, not for cycling, but for all modes, and that includes rail and freight. And so what the staff are suggesting and have done is to reflect that at an officer level, so that to this table, these people around the table who have voting members, which is set by statute of the Land Transport Act, requires the setup of this committee, that everybody that has a voting right at this table considers all modes. As Katie's suggested, Waka Kotahi are moving in that direction in terms of funding, and it's on this committee to ensure that they understand that. So I understand your desire to have a voting right, but actually the legislation does not permit it. And so the best that this committee could do, in addition to not only taking up that mantle themselves, but if they felt that they needed some expertise in that regard, is to have a non-voting advisory member.
Can I have another chair through you, Mr. Chair?
The question, yeah, because we'll get to discussion in a moment.
Yeah. So the question to me is, what has changed from the last 3 years to now? Because we haven't seen that actually everybody around this table has taken the role to implement and take effect of active transport. That's what we have as a group have identified. So my question is, what has changed?
Who's your question too, Jared?
I'm asking the chair, and you can then pass it on to whoever you
Yeah, at the
can
moment
be
we're
as a
doing
whole group.
At the moment, we're doing questions to the staff on the report.
So I can answer.
But if your question is to the road controlling authorities that make decisions about where footpaths, roundabouts and bus stops go, they're here too. So feel free who you direct your question to.
Well, ask it to staff then.
Yep.
Yeah.
What has changed?
So I can answer that. So what has significantly changed is the last regional land transport plan. And that if we did it again today, it would be even more different. Emissions reduction planning has gone in a different, well, not different direction, but it's accelerated since the last RLTP. And so every cycle we have from now is going to have even more focus and higher targets and bigger ambitions. But considerably since the last RLTP, that focus on reducing vehicle kilometres travelled with the emissions reduction plan makes our complete focus change. The RPTP that we've discussed and heard from this morning, it's about us getting people out of their cars, having an integrated network, making sure that the first and last leg is just as important as the middle of the journey. So this is considerably different to how it's ever been approached before. And I think the view is of all people, it's not just about cars on roads anymore. It's considerably more about the whole network and how it connects. And I think if we take one aspect out of it and focus on that in a different way, you lose the integrated network approach. And so that to me is what's changed, looking at the network as a whole, the emissions reduction plan, and everything that's happened since the last RLTP cycle.
Mayor Walker.
So am I understanding correctly that the idea of how to pick up the active transport committee concept is to pick it up into what you call a special interest group rather than the term of committee, which then allows them to assemble and participate in TAG, and then potentially, if we recommend it, to participate as an advisor onto this committee as well?
So the special interest group is a term for the regional sector, but we're essentially replicating that for our technical advisory group that we currently have operating with your staff, our staff, us. And we are working with each of your councils to grow that technical advisory group with not only engineers, which is typically populated with TAG, but with planners, disability groups, road safe, all of your staff that actively are in transport and that are looking forward, of course, regional spatial strategy and how we are assembling ourselves as a region is right at the forefront of that. It would become a special interest group type. They wouldn't come to you as a member at this table. We would be bringing advice to you just as we are now through that, but it's much more multimodal.
Councillor Lambert.
Yes, I take it that you're expecting all the TAG members, which are done by the councils, to rearrange themselves to make sure that they are able to get the voice of their districts.
Correct.
How all these active modes can be employed.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Kerr.
I'm really interested in making sure that we get great clarity around this table in this active transport space in its most broad form. Opportunities, achievements, roadblocks. I mean, roadblocks is probably the wrong terminology.
Maybe not.
But I agree with Councillor Van Beek that I think we've been too quiet in this space. Might have been happening, but it hasn't got to this table. And whatever I can do to support the inclusion at the TAG level, and actually somebody sitting at this table, not in a voting capacity, but to be able to inform me, explain to me, and others, so that when we vote, I feel we vote with the full knowledge of what we've been challenged with. That's where I'm coming from, quite selfishly as a voting member. I want all of the reporting, and I want somebody I can debate across the table with.
All right, well, if I can just share some thoughts, because I went to that meeting that Councillor Van Beek referred to. In the interests of cohesion and making sure that the staff that we rely on, including the TAG, to actually deliver our governance aspiration are on board, deferred rather than putting a motion that I know my colleagues would have liked me to have put last time. I have since discussed this extensively with the staff and with some of the the community representatives in question. I participated in the TAG meeting on the 8th of August to put a proposal advanced by Councillor Kerr for the appointment of a community-appointed Regional Active Transport Committee that could be represented on this committee and participate in the work stream discussions of the TAG. I built on the original recommendation in the paper last time that an integrated and collaborative approach to incorporating active modes of transport into the TAG and RTC by adding representatives from active transport into the regional TAG. I also reflected on that was in paragraph 30 of the paper from the last meeting. I reflected on the comments in the paper this meeting that we have a situation where all other modes of transport are represented around this committee other than active transport through Kiwi Rail, through New Zealand Police, through road freight and through AA. I reflected on the suggestion, if I can just find the agenda item, that here we go, that there is a case for what I would call positive discrimination, in that it is arguably necessary for us to favour the modes that have not been given equal consideration historically, and I think that's Councillor Van Beek's point. I reflected on the fact that, or one of them, active transport, active modes, paragraph 22.1, would have a standing item at each RTC meeting, and that advisory members of the committee could be appointed to that end and participate in the work stream discussions. With all of that in mind, and where I've said this before, if Hawke's Bay can't make active transport work, in this, with our flat topography, with our passionate cycling community and our incredible climate, who can? Now, I love Palmerston North, but you can ride 4 ways around a block in that town into a headwind. Because I know as a student, I did that for years. We have got every advantage here, and yet we are starting from a position of relative disadvantage. With all of that in mind, I have, sorry, Linda. I have put up a suggested motion here, and I'll just take you through it. The first item on the motion is as per the report, that we received this report. The second is that this committee acknowledges, so we're not appointing, we're acknowledging the intended formation of a Hawke's Bay Regional Active Transport Committee. Now that could call itself what it wants, but I've called it that because that's what I've been told it would be called. Comprising a community-appointed and facilitated committee representing active transport interests at a regional level, including cycling and walking, as the key community stakeholder for all future transport infrastructure planning investment decisions with active transport implications. So we acknowledge that is the intention. And then the more operative part is that this committee recommends that the terms of reference of the committee be amended, that's for next triennium, to record active transport as an express function of the committee, with active transport to be a standing agenda item, and that reflects, as I say, paragraph 22.1. That we include an advisory member dedicated to active transport on the committee, with the intent that this would be the chair of the RATC when established. But look, that may not be exactly what happens, or we may decide over time there is some other engagement vehicle. I'm trying to be relatively open, and it would be the next committee or council. This is a start. So I'm proposing what we do lock in is that there would be an advisory member dedicated to active transport, with the intent that this would be this new committee once established, and that we require the technical advisory group to invite the active transport advisory member to attend all work stream discussions involving active transport and to consult the RATC when established regarding new transport active implications of all decisions made. So that's what I'm proposing. I do believe it to be consistent. I do believe it with everything that's been said. I also think that would ensure we have this holistic approach, that we're not operating in silos, that we're not duplicating structures and governance, but we are at the same time enabling community stakeholder experts and representatives to be at the table at the technical level when that discussion is at that technical level, but equally to be a voice around this table to the maximum we can do within the Land Transport Management Act. So with all of that said, I have proposed that motion up there. I'm not going to put it as yet, but I invite discussion on it. Councillor Kerr.
Small question. Today we heard from our disability community about some limitations they have in active transport. I just put it out there that I would like to see stronger links between the disability community and this Regional Active Transport Committee. Understanding that at the moment, Regional Council lean on the Napier City Council and Hastings District Council disability reference groups at the moment. So there's already a link from the councils into the community, but if I just look over the table, I think that would be great if it could be picked up in the terms of reference of the active transport group in whatever form it's
Yes.
created, please.
I think I'd be quite open to that group to do exactly that. I definitely want to pick up the disabled reference group structure within our public transport plan. But equally, I can see it can have a home in here as well. Councillor Lambert. No, Councillor Mayor Walker, I think you were first.
I think I've got two questions. First one is what is this recommendation consistent or inconsistent with what staff have just told us in their paper? Because I can't figure it out. And second of all, if it's a committee structure, who is going to be the secretariat providing the active support for it?
Two great questions. I can't answer the first one, but I think yeah. Okay.
I think you can. So through you, Chair, this is not intended to be a committee that is established by any council. This is about if we took this off, if we took the name away and we said out there in the community there was a group or an organisation or an advocacy group that is existing, a network, and they were in the same vein as the Automobile Association or the freight, I can't remember.
Transport New Zealand.
Thank you. Then you could, as a committee, invite them to sit as an advisory member on this table to provide that non-voting advisory advice. We are not intending that to be serviced by any council. So they would be a self-sustaining group.
Yeah, look, I mean, can I
I
answer
think I've
part
got
of
more
that question
I
too?
think I've got more questions.
I think that was one of the questions raised in the TAG meeting that I went to. But I believe this to be consistent with the report. I believe it to be the resolution that was missing at the end of the report that Councillor Van Beek spoke to, that it in fact picks up on the substance of that report and the ambition that the staff have got to make active transport be where it needs to be in the future. We're in a sort of a transition phase here. But in terms of that committee being serviced and facilitated and minute-taking and rooms and catering or whatever it might be, we are not directing here, but that won't stop it happening. At a practical level, the Hastings District Council has been operating this tag in precisely that way and providing that support. But it doesn't mean, we don't have to require that to know that that in fact can happen. I just want to get this front and centre within our terms of reference and within our minds to start this journey.
I'm just questioning whether we are saying that there aren't any groups like this out there, and if there are, why don't we just get them together?
We don't know.
Yeah, exactly. We know there's one in Hastings, and I know that Wairua has a group that does that, but it's an adventure type group, because actually they get out there and cycle around the environment. So, but it's right for Wairua. So I'm just saying, if we haven't looked out there, why haven't we?
Well, we have, and that's the point, Councillor Lambert, that's the point. This needs to come from the grassroots up, because there are all of these groups that have got different roles and purposes and people. This is an opportunity for them to coalesce into a structure that means they can better engage with us as a council, local authority structure. That's my view.
Yeah, it does sound like you're duplicating it for the tag, because they're going to have to go out and find their own stuck on their area anyway.
No, this will avoid that, because this means they will know and trust that they've got a community stakeholder that represents that voice.
But the transport guy from Wairau, he should be talking to his own transport people. You want him to come to the bay and talk
They
to
can
someone?
both come down.
I think Linda was first.
Well, they're gonna have to.
So in relation to this, we're talking about Secretariat. And Hastings at the moment is run by Hastings, but we've got a regional cycle governance group that actually is run by us, Hawkesbury Region Council. Nobody's actually said, go away, you're ugly, that is still in place. Why actually don't we actually, as a council, take up that role to actually manage the active transport committee region-wide? Because that's what we have with, if we had all these TAs running their active transport committees, then Whakakotai will need to go to all 4 of them. And so we actually agreed the most and best use of our time would actually be to actually create one active transport committee right across. And that was actually going to then, the regional cycling governance group would then actually be morphed into actually one regional group. That's what the idea was. But we haven't, that's been fallen off the page because it hasn't ended up in our papers, or in your papers, so to speak. So therefore, it's been forgotten and lost.
Linda? I know Katrina wants to speak.
Okay.
Hand up first.
Mine's maybe a slight aside. I think, firstly, I think we need to commend the discussion that we're having here and the focus on active transport and where it's taking us. I am in the fortunate position that I sit on 4 RTCs, including this, and the structure that your officers are proposing is what I see in my other RTCs and what's quite common across the rest of the country. I think the work that's being done to strengthen the RTAG and the work streams is excellent. Fully support that. And again, in other RTCs that are performing very well, they're heavily reliant on that quality operational group that provides the right advice, and that we need to have confidence that we're getting the right advice from the officers and the expertise in that group. When it comes to us as members, as per what's set out in the Land Transport Act, we are here, if you like, as guardians of your regional transport system. And I use that word specifically, system. It is up to us as members to look at it from all facets. None of us here are looking at it through one mode. We're required to look at it through all. And that should be informed by the advice we get from the RTAG and the special interest group. That's not to say that we shouldn't have advisory group members, absolutely support that, and that should support the aspirations of your regional transport system and what you want to achieve. And whether that's freight, whether it's the AA, whether it's active transport, that's the part that we need to flush out. But I would just say that I strongly support what's being proposed here and see it and work with it on a daily basis, and it works really well. So I think it's well thought through. Thank you.
Now, Katrina.
Chair, we have not expressly included the cycling governance group that existed for a specific reason. In conversations and discussions, I should say, with Group Manager Assets, Hawke's Bay Regional Council, that cycling governance group was specific to the Hawke's Bay Trails to govern the infrastructure and spending of the Hawke's Bay Trails. Last time, and this paper has been circulating for a year, I get that, it was confusing, the first paper we ever had come to this committee. And the reason it was confusing, in my view, was because we we mixed up.
Got it.
Holy moly, those matters. So I've had very good advice from my colleague, Chris Dolly, about that. They have no intention of expanding that cycling governance group to beyond the Hawke's Bay Trails. And that is the advice that I've received. That group, with all due respect, does not include all modes of transport, all modes of active transport. And we would need, it would need to be considerably much broader than that to be the advisory on this committee.
All right,
Chairman?
yeah, up here.
Kia ora, ladies. Two issues. If we were talking about plumbing, we would invite a plumber in. Is that what you more or less say? You give us advice.
So what we're saying, councillor, is that at the technical advisory group level, which is the officer level, we are supplementing and growing the technical advice on the group to ensure that all modes of transport are considered in the advice that is brought to you to help develop the program business case and then the regional land transport plan. If this committee chooses and wants to have an advisory member on this committee for active modes of transport, staff support that.
But they would be permanent.
As an advisory member, they cannot be a voting member.
Okay. The other issue is the composition of this committee. I appreciate being here, but I only represent our Māori committee. I don't represent our RPCs.
No.
And, you know, we're talking about our PSGs, our treaty settlement partners. Why aren't they not here? Why don't we have a voice from them?
Through you, Chair, the establishment of these committees are set by statute. You're correct, we can have advisory members as much as we like. However, what Katie and I have been discussing is how we connect our regional planning committee much more closely to the regional transport committee in light of the changes to RMA legislation and what is coming at us in terms of the requirement to undertake regional spatial strategies. And we think that's where the connection point will be between these two committees. Rather than grow this committee beyond numbers that are workable, actually making sure there are proper connection points where they're necessary.
You know, Dr. Gwynn and his wife came in the last session and he made comment about the environment. And so that's what we're working on, as you know, with the Kotahi plan. You know, we're touching on all the facets of the environment, you know. And so between these two committees, you know, we're sending information this way and vice versa. So, you know, so a lot of work has been done in the environment, as we know, but that could have been explained to those two people who were here earlier.
It could be, I agree, Councillor, you will, as Kotahi progresses, have papers brought to you from Hawke's Bay Regional Council's planning staff about the transport sections of Kotahi, and they will be seeking your input into that as a committee.
Thank you.
Where are we at? Councillor Kerr.
Simple question and then probably a more open-ended question. Under our regional land transport plan, we've got a cycling plan review. Last year, was that done?
It's,
The Hawke's Bay Regional Cycle Plan is a 10-year plan, sets out our priorities for cycling and is undergoing a review in 2021. I can't remember.
through you, Chair, it's currently in draft.
Lovely, thank you.
So it was prepared by the Regional Cycling Governance Group, but of course, part of the issue was that was done in silo and not as an integrated approach to our whole of network. So that is still currently in draft.
All right.
Mr. Chair, that's contrary to what I just heard.
Hang on, can we just do this one at a time? Just hold the fire there.
I understand that answer. Thank you. Thank you for that. I understand the constraints of the several parts of our cycling network. The next question is, I touched on with you earlier. I want to make sure that whatever we do here now and the recommendations will allow this committee to ensure a slightly expanded scope so that we fit in with environmental aspirations and, as I think Martin touched on, the regional spatial plan, or somebody might have touched on. So just to clarify, these recommendations as they sit are not going to constrain us fitting in up there. Lovely, thank you.
Absolutely.
Any more discussion? Now, did you have a point you wish to make?
Yeah, just a point. The question was asked regarding the draft cycling plan. The staff member, Chris Dolly, mentioned that the regional cycling group only was there for the cycle network, okay? However, I just hear now from Katie that the regional cycling group actually set over and above the draft plan. That's conflicting.
No, it's not conflicting. Through you, Chair, that was undertaken without the transport team's involvement. It was undertaken without this committee's involvement, and that's why it remains in draft, so that we can circle back around as a transport team and have a proper look at that and bring that forward to this committee for review once we have got all modes, all areas of cycling considered in that plan. It didn't include a whole of organisation approach to that.
So to add to that, just point 8 of the report, I'll just read through it. So it said, through lack of representation and action on behalf of active transport at a regional level, which is what we're addressing, a group established to steer the development and maintenance of the Hawke's Bay Trails, a destination cycling network, has become the proxy for regional cycling governance. This group, now known as the Regional Cycling Governance Group, RCGG, has become concerned with the regional governance of cycling. The RCGG has elected members representing each territorial authority. However, there is no formal authority attached to this group. As a result, decisions and developments in this group are done so in isolation, which is what we refer to. So Katrina's point about Chris Dolly saying that that group is set up to establish and steer the Hawke's Bay Trails, that continues to be the case, but the group itself has developed in isolation and then also put together that draft cycling plan, which didn't happen as a whole of network approach, which is why it's still in draft, because it doesn't integrate with the rest of the network as such, hence it's still in draft.
Look, I'd like to come back to the motion up there, and I would just like to understand whether any of the staff or any of our TAG members present have any major problems with the wording and with the model that's proposed. I'm not saying, I just want to understand if there is a strong case against any of this that we need to be aware of. An open invitation to the room.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I'm sort of looking at number 2 with it's a key community stakeholder or a community appointed and facilitated committee. I would hope that we're looking at a community of Hawke's Bay, not an individual or a few people from one part of the region. And that would be my only concern with this is we need to make sure whoever is representing this as an active transport committee represents the whole of Hawke's Bay, not just a Napier or a Hastings or a CHB or a Wairoa.
Good point, Sean, and that's why I'd added the words representing active transport interests at regional level. It may be a little bit subtle, but that was the thinking. Anyone else wish to comment? Oh, yeah, Mayor Walker.
So I understand the special interest group and work stream structure that is being recommended here to come into the TAG, which is really helpful. I think the word committee in this recommendation is the bit that gets a bit stuck, because committee in our local government context tends to be connected to some kind of formal structure with a minute taker in a room and, you know, somewhere to meet. And so I think that's the bit that's making it difficult for me, because let's be honest, we've got things like the road safety committee and others that have we've been through this before, and we've only just resolved to absorb them background into a special interest stream and feeding into TAG. So I just want to make sure we're not getting ourselves confused and going down a path on this active transport special interest, which is just recreating the problems of the past we've had with other committees. So if we're clear that the word committee there is because it's a voluntarily formed group of interested parties from across the region, then I can understand it. I just don't want there to be an expectation that it's a committee of council in any way, shape or form. That's the bit that's hanging me up.
And that, again, I go back to my language of a community appointed and facilitated committee.
As long as we're really clear about that, really clear.
I am, and but I equally think to give the entity some gravitas, to just call it a group arguably diminishes that, and for want of a word and Shakespeare and all those things, would prefer to leave it as stands, but I'm interested in any other views on that point.
I'm okay with the word committee being there. I just want us to be, as we make this resolution, really clear about what that means to have that word there.
All right, well, I'm going to move that motion. Does anyone want to second it? Kerr will. All right. Voting members, I suppose we could speak to it now. It has been moved and seconded. I think I've said everything I wanted to say about it. Councillor Kerr, is there anything further you want to say about it?
I think it's been a really healthy and worthwhile conversation to have. It might seem like sometimes we get into the nitty-gritty of a word, for example, committee, but that's about ensuring we all understand what we're trying to achieve. Chair, I'm very supportive of these recommendations. I think they've been formulated over probably 3 meetings of discussions around what we're trying to achieve. And the best outcome out of this is this incredible focus on changing aspirations from a good roading network to multimodal that really enhances the opportunity for active transport. And that's actually what this is about. It's not about who sits at this table, but it's about how we can achieve better outcomes for our community. So thank you for your work in creating and crafting these recommendations, and thank you to your staff.
Thank you for your proposal. All right, are there anyone else wish to speak to the Councillor Price?
I think it fulfils what this group's after, apart from a voting right. And you couldn't take committee away because I couldn't think what else you could put on the end of RAT.
Rashy.
You might be able to think of something, but, you know, I think it fulfills what this group is after. And as I say, we don't want to give away our voting powers too much, do we?
I don't think we're allowed to.
I got that, Katrina.
Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, I can see the merits of the committee. I just don't want them to get the wrong idea about whether we can pay for their time and effort, considering people have come from a long way away, or they just took one straight off. I don't know. Because I know that like the likes of the Transport Association, they have a larger following already, and same with the Automobile Association. They really look after themselves. Yeah,
Yeah, I understand.
we all understand we're putting them out there to look after themselves.
So look, I really support the strengthening of the voice of active transport into what we're doing with our transport system. And I think this is a really, really important move. And I think it's coupled really strongly with us asking our TAG group to be specialists across a far wider system, and to make sure that that comes to the table. Because, you know, our land transport engineers are not active transport specialists, and they're not planners. And so I think this is where this group is so vitally important. And that will strengthen that voice here at this table as well as empowering all of our teams that are working together at the TAG to be getting the best outcomes that we can. So I think this is a great way forward.
Linda.
Support this move. I just really want to reiterate the importance of the quality reporting and the quality advice that comes from the RTAG, from our officers and from those with the expertise to help inform our decision making. I would also just like to comment that personally from a Waka Kotahi perspective, that I think we have seen an improvement in the evolution of the projects within the RLTP in the region. It may not be as fast as everybody would like, but it is worth noting that that is guided and fully informed by the government policy statement on transport, which sets out the investment priorities that and the projects that can secure funding within the region. So there are some constraints around that for the region as well. I would also note that the GPS 2024 will be coming out for initial engagement shortly, so that's something else that you can have your voice into for what's important for the Hawke's Bay region and perhaps more broadly the Central North Island. And then we have a presentation coming up later on this afternoon that just explores in a little bit more detail and some of the practicalities of the emissions reduction plan and how that will be taken into account through future RLTP development. So I would just say, you know, making good strides, but it's perhaps not as fast as everybody would like to see. Thank you.
All right. I think that's all the voting members have spoken. So the motion is put. All in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? Thank you. Thank you to everyone involved and for the passion and leadership, Councillor Van Beek, in getting this onto our agenda. It's acknowledged.
Thank you.
And I'd like to acknowledge Graham Taylor in this context as well. For the incredible hard work he has done for the cycling active transport interest in the years past as well. So we can now move on to the Transport Manager's report. Adi, I think that's you.
That is me. Yeah. Sorry, bear with me. I'm just going to quickly flick over and see if there's anything I want to focus your attention to. One thing, so just before I get to probably the most important point, just to make mention, since I wrote this report, on-demand public transport, which is item or point 7 on my report, we have had our most successful day since the service has operated, which, as I alluded to in point 7.2, that it is a result of the tweaking that we've done to service parameters, and that has seen some great success. But as mentioned in previous items, obviously it's a success statistically. There's still obviously accessibility improvements that can be made. Just moving on to item 30. So we have got reports from all of our road controlling authorities. This is something new that we have established in partnership with Waka Kotahi over the last quarter to make sure that we are more accurately reporting on what is happening at an RCA level around the region. I noticed when I came on that it was very much nothing to report, when there was in fact things to report. And so we are now doing that more robustly at a TAG level, and this will be done even more so when we break into work streams, and we will have the opportunity to discuss it in more detail. So you'll notice that I have attached some of the updates from the various councils. Napier City Councils is missing for various reasons, mostly staffing and resourcing, but I did want to invite Josh Lloyd just the opportunity to speak to CHB, if that is okay, Mr.
Absolutely.
Chair.
Josh, please go ahead. You come up here and we can see and hear.
Extremely brief. I don't want to oversell things with the grand introduction to the table. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just wanted to take the opportunity to talk to our report as it sits nestled in the larger report, and just acknowledge that it is brief in nature and probably reflective of Katie's comments of a history of reporting of nothing to see here. The report adequately does a job of reporting on the work programs as they were set at the start of the last RLTP. Since then, the focus of council has shifted very recently towards significant challenges with the resilience of our land transport network. So that is not reflected in the report, and we'll make sure next time it is. Right now, In Central Hawke's Bay, we're battling with over 30, the number growing every day, large slips on our roading network, the sorts of slips that we would typically deal with 1 or 2 of a year. We have right now over 30 on our books. We have maintenance crews that, having been pulled into those significant kind of slip response events, are behind on routine programmed work and a network of roads that is suffering because of it. We also have a shifting focus towards the integrated planning and strategic planning of our transport network, kind of reflecting the themes that have been discussed today and a more active engagement in active transport, mode shift, decarbonisation of fleet, integrated spatial planning, linking with town centre planning and so on, and some really good examples of what great looks like in that area with the media this week about Central Hawke's Bay being successful with our Streets for People application. So acknowledging the work that the team have done in putting the report together to date, but probably signalling fairly strongly that it may look a little bit different next time. And it may not be totally reflective of the challenges or focus areas that Central Hawke's Bay is currently kind of targeting. That's me.
Thank you very much. Right, questions on the report. I've got a couple I'd like to start with. Katie, can you just give us a bit of an overview of how, bear with me, just coming back to your paper, government's half-price fare scheme integrates with on-demand in terms of the community service card holder from post-February 2023 and now?
So we had scheduled, obviously, to have the community services card half-price scheme in place by September. The current half-price scheme to all bus users had been extended now to the end of January, which means that the community services card scheme will come in on the 1st of February. We very much appreciate the additional time. Because obviously in the background we are doing quite a lot of work with our regional ticketing system cohort to make sure that the concession is automated. It's a considerable amount of work for administrators to be dealing with additional concessions and loading them against B cards. For the implementation of our on-demand trial, we chose not to extend the half-price fares to on-demand while it was in trial. We felt that because we were launching it during the trial, it would impact the value of the service and how that could be seen afterwards. And so obviously we had indicated to people that the half-price fare would be available as soon as the concession was in place. So that will be in place, that'll be connected to B cards. We're still looking at ways that it could be connected to the VIA app, but VIA are unable to present an option for us at this point. Whereas with the B card, you actually have an ability to log someone's concession number against their B card, with privacy being the key element for that. So it will be a concession only available on the B card at this stage, which is
Community service card.
for the community service
from
card
February.
holders from February the 1st.
Right.
Yeah, and that will be across all modes.
Okie dokie. Now, my next question was, it's actually probably one that is best addressed by Waka Kotahi. It's to do with driver licensing and the funding that was expended. And I see some reference to a $16.9 million fund for a new driver licensing scheme later on in the agenda. Is there an opportunity there for this region to tap into some of that in the short to now, given that there are pressing needs for driver licensing, particularly in Central Hawke's Bay and Wairoa at the moment?
I would say yes, perhaps not tomorrow, but we can skip over this slide later, but we have 2 work streams, one to improve what's called the overall driver licensing improvement programme. That's mainly to look at equity of access, especially for rural and geographically isolated communities. That's to ensure that we have the provision of testing officers, but also as well testing facilities, and where they can't be provided, that we're actually able to provide transport to and from for those communities to access them. We are working collaboratively on this, so MSD, the Ministry of Education, Te Puna Kōkiri, the police, ACC are all involved, so it is truly a cross-government agency approach. And at the same time as actually identifying and working through some of the policy that will be required to change, some of the statutory and regulatory requirements that need to be changed, we're cracking on and testing or thinking out is 2 trials, one in Te Tautokoro in Northland and one in Te Tairāwhiti. And that is to actually look at how does some of what we think could work actually work in practice. And that's doing community-based provision. Once we test that out, and they're both 12 months trials, they're 6 months in at the moment, we should have enough learning from there to have a look at how we ripple that out into other communities. So I'd say we're probably about 6 months off being able to give you a definitive, what does that mean for Wairoa or for Central Hawkesbury?
All right, so if we were to follow this up at the March meeting next year,
Yep, keep some pressure
March
on.
meeting next year, driver's licensing funding update, Waka Kotahi.
On that note, Mr Chair, do we need to gather our evidence? Do we already have the evidence of what the needs are? Because I wouldn't like to wait till then before we, yeah.
And understand Scottish.
Sorry.
Mr Chair, did you want to adjourn the meeting for a moment?
Yes. If we could just take a pause, I'm not sure what that was about, but I did hear the word. All right, so we put as a follow-up for March that the funding opportunities for driver licensing would be addressed by Waka Kotahi. Mayor Walker had just raised a point regarding the Matariki strategy around this. Could you just please repeat that?
Also, there is an active network group that formed a number of years ago around the driver's licensing that brings all the providers together. So I'm pretty sure that Katie would be able to bring some information aboard from them.
Okay, fantastic. All right, now that was a slight diversion. The questions are supposed to be onto the report author, but it was raised, and I just, well, we hit now. Councillor Kerr, the questions to Katie.
Yeah, so questions to Katrina and Katie. This is slightly off your report, but I think the action will fall to you both. As discussed quietly offline, I would be interested in asking the Regional Council to consider a change of terms of reference so that the mayors and chairs can attend this ex officio, so they can come to any meeting and be part of the meeting. I'm not asking for the entities that councillors or mayors or chairs represent has a change in voting rights. I still understand that, for example, the Regional Council would still have 2 votes and others 1 vote. But I just think it would help with the flexibility as all councils are going to move into a new age with regional spatial plans and new staff, new councillors around the table, etc. So can I just leave that with you? I have spoken to the chair ever so briefly about it, but could I leave it for you to consider and maybe produce a recommendation that people are satisfied with, if that's all right.
Right? I think that's a follow-up.
Just send it.
Yes, yeah,
Got that?
we're having a conversation about that right now, so yes, it's
Okay.
being captured.
All right.
Fabulous, thank you.
Councillor Price.
Very quick question. Byways, item 8. Do we have a timeline for Napier? We're pretty excited about getting it. And we don't like Hastings having it for too long.
Thank you for your passionate interest, Councillor Price. Yes, and apologies, the timeline is currently in progress, so I couldn't include that in this report. But we are currently developing the project brief for the Napier trial. At a high level, I could say that we are intending to have that in place by the start of next financial year, so 1st July 2023. And that is what we are aiming towards. Obviously, as we develop our timeline and with supply chain issues, whatever they may be, that may be slightly varied, but that is the intention. We have begun work on the Napier trial.
Great, it's light at the end of the tunnel.
With very much great learnings from Hastings.
Correct.
Just so you're clear, it's like Hastings, Wairoa, Central Hawke's Bay, then Napier.
Yeah.
Settle down.
Well, look, in all seriousness, this is a proof and model because we do have a public transport policy to do with community trusts in a submission from Central Hawke's Bay saying, well, make sure we're part of that too, because it just talks about Wairoa. So, you know, I just think the whole app technology enabled sharing, you know, model, it just opens up so many opportunities. So, yeah, don't worry. I think it's got wings to fly across the region in some shape or form as part of the overall system. Okay, any more questions on the paper? I did have a couple more questions, I'm afraid. Freight distribution study program business case. It says the agenda included presentations from Waka Kotahi on the regional program business case. What is that business case for?
So currently, we have again another document in draft that has been in draft since 2021, correct? 2020?
2020?
The PDC? No, the regional program business case. Is that since 2020 or 20? Yeah, so it's been in draft for about 2 years. So we have discussed the very urgent need for us to pick that back up. So currently, myself and Waka Kotahi are working on looking at how that's been scoped, what kind of commitment from the contractor who developed that to get it to completion. And that obviously informs the investment prioritisation for the next RLTP, so it's a priority. We're also, outside of the scope of this, doing work on a freight distribution strategy, which will align quite nicely.
I see. The regional program business case was as for the first step of the current regional land transport plan to
Correct.
evaluate where we're at with our network and how it's operating, how the investments are working.
Correct.
Okay, so it's actually the first step
Yes.
for the next RLTP.
Apologies for not making that clearer.
All right. And I think actually I did have one more question I just wanted to ask.
Mr. Chair?
Hang on, can I just ask my question? There's a road safety discussion here, and we have a new structure out of the Section 17A review, and we've got the development of a detailed regional road safety strategy. Now, do I recall correctly that comes up to us as an RTC for approval at governance level?
Yes.
Okay, Councillor Kerr.
With the new RLTP coming up, my question is to the Regional Council as a whole to ensure that, and to the TAG, that we're fully resourced to be able to achieve and get done the studies and the evidence that we need to be able to feed into a good RLTP. We hear of the challenges brought about by COVID and delays, etc. So a high-level question, because I don't want to get close to the RLTP to go, well, hang on, we didn't have a chance to do that. We're still 6 months behind on a, for example, freight study or our safety team hasn't been able to achieve. So the challenge to make sure that we do fully resource to make sure we get this, because this is such an important plan coming up. The RLTP.
Right, any response to that from the staff?
Through you, Chair, you're absolutely correct. And so Katie and I have been, for the last almost 2 years now, growing, I have been in this role for almost 2 years, growing the transport team. Behind me, you will see our new transport planner sitting at a desk. That's Bryce. He has quite lofty expectations. I have quite lofty expectations.
And you can see where they're coming
It's his first week, and he's already writing a deliberations report, so best he get cracking. Katie is already well up to her neck in work. So, and we also have a sustainable transport advisor. And so the team are as resourced as our funding will allow us at this point, but we are leveraging all our relationships, particularly those with Waka Kotahi, Lisa and Sarah sitting behind us as well.
Thank you. I think that's really important to understand, because I know how under pressure you have been.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mayor Walker. Yep.
I actually wonder whether the question back to our table is how are we as individual TAs making sure that when we go into our LTPs, we are setting the bar in terms of how we're contributing to that process from our own teams as well, because that then helps them too. So I think we all probably need to take some responsibility on that.
All right. Any more discussion or comments on this report, or can we just move that it be received? Councillor Price, thank you. Anyone want to second that motion? All right. All in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? Done.
Great report.
And yeah, lots of exciting things happening. So on that note, it's a great segue, exciting things happening into the NZTA Central Region Regional Director's Report.
I'm feeling a bit distracted, apologies.
Are you okay? Do you want to stand the item down?
No, you're okay. I just need to,
We could do the emissions reduction plan first.
no, we'll get cracking. Keep the level of distraction to one side. Let's get into it. There we go. Okay, first up, just want to say big congratulations to all of the councils that were successful on Streets for People proposals.
Thank you.
Yes. Hawke's was really well represented. The Central North Island was really represented. So ka pai to your officers for their great work, and to the Waka Kotahi team involved. I think we had 6 or 7 of the 13 councils, and 3 of them from here as well. So excellent result. And secondly, as well, just on behalf of Waka Kotahi, but it's been really, really good to accompany the Minister along with DIA to meet with all of the rural and provincial councils. We found it hugely valuable, the insights, especially with the Minister and 2 of the agencies in the room. So really appreciate you giving up your time for that. We will get into this now. Okay, usual format, we have a few updates at a national level, and then we'll get into the regional updates. So we'll try and keep this a bit snappy and get into questions. So an update on the asset management data standard. We've spoken about this, I think, in a couple of RTCs, and just to update you, firstly, a bit of a refresher that this standard provides the structure for consistency of the collection of asset data right across all of our assets collectively. So it's aiming to ensure that we all use a common language to describe the service, the impact, the asset life cycle right across our transport system. It enables all of you, as well as us, to make sure that we are planning as best we can for the maintenance and the replacement of the roading assets, and also as well to help us prioritise what we need to fund, and all having visibility of that as well. So again, this is something else that will help us in our RLTP development going forwards. We've got a small group from Greater Wellington region over the next 12 months getting their data into this, and then over the next 5 years we will have everybody, including Waka Kotahi, into this. And that's everything from bridges and footpaths to culverts to the roads themselves. So we'll continue to work with your team on what that looks and feels like for your council. Driver licensing improvement, we kind of stole the show a little bit with that earlier. I don't think I have any more to add on that, and we'll definitely do you an update. If I get one before, I can bring a brief update to December as well. Coastal shipping, you might be aware that under the current GPS and under this NLTP, Waka Kotahi is making investment into coastal shipping. We have run quite a different model to get to this point, in that we developed it alongside the sector and industry themselves, as opposed to Waka Kotahi sort of setting this up in isolation. So we did that with the NZ Shipping Federation, the Port Company CEO Group, National Road Carriers, Kiwi Rail, as well as MOT, and of course ourselves. And all of those entities were involved in whittling down the applications for this fund down to the 4 that you see there. Essentially what this is aiming to do is to increase our capacity when it comes to coastal shipping. So each of these organisations have received funding for different types of vessels to actually move products around New Zealand's coast. You'll note here the likes of Move has traditionally been a road freight company, and they're diversifying their business and taking this first step into coastal shipping. And the other one of note, no, it's Move that's actually an interesting one. They're looking at moving more by road down to New Plymouth, and then coastal shipping from New Plymouth to Nelson on a roll-on, roll-off. Building a bit of resilience but extra capacity into their network. And the Aotearoa Shipping Alliance is moving aggregates around the west coast, but they're also looking at similar investment up in Tairāwhiti for logging and aggregate movement as well, and that's by barging. The great thing about this is that when you work with the commercial sector, things happen real fast. So they've put their applications in, they've got the money and they're on it, and the boats are getting produced now. So the thing for us is, this works when we're all under pressure to begin to decarbonise and we're looking at different ways of working. This is quite a neat model, actually, where you get in step with those that can make innovation and change happen quite rapidly. So it's been an interesting process for all of us. So they will have their boats and increased capacity out by the end of the NLTP and be trucking. Sorry, excuse me. God, that was bad, sorry. We'll just keep going. But, yeah, we'll barge on. Thanks for that. We'll get serious again. Tōmata Taio. This is we've mentioned this previously as well, and this is our environmental and social responsibility standard. It has just recently been updated. And again, one to note for our RLTP development. The Z19, I asked what on earth does that mean? That is just where it sits in a whole range of policy standards. There you go. The thing to really note in here is that the primary outcome from this is to help us all better protect the environmental impact of what we do, everything from maintenance to new capital projects. And within this, there's what's called a new environmental screen, which is essentially guidance or a checklist for all that we do to make sure that we understand the impact of those decisions, but help us to select the best possible option for any work that we're doing. And that also helps to inform things like your multi-criteria analysis for business cases. And it highlights as well if there's any other technical assessments that you should be considering doing, or any stakeholders that you need to consider giving greater emphasis to engaging with. That could be the likes of Heritage New Zealand right the way through to Tangata Whenua. So it's quite a good prompt to make sure that all of us, so that's approved organisations, yourselves, Waka Kotahi, that we are continually reviewing our way of working and the impact that we're having socially and environmentally. So encourage you there to take a look at it, but it will be something that we'll be looking to make more use of for the next NLTF. Now, we will move into more of a regional update.
Excuse me, Linda, can we ask questions as we go through, or would you prefer them at the end?
What would you prefer, Chair? I'm good either way.
Your call.
We can go as we go if you fancy.
Thank you.
Have you got one? On this one? This way, sorry.
Of course I've got a question.
The hypothetical.
I'm on fire today, bear with me. Normal service next time. So this has come out of end of first year of NLTP and also the great updated reporting and the work that our RTAG is doing to give us collective visibility of how we're tracking year on year, so that by the time that we get to the end of this RLTP, there's no surprises. We're all aware of what's progressed and what maybe has taken a little bit longer than perhaps we were anticipating. So here you'll see the local road maintenance work. Even everything that all of you have had to deal with is tracking pretty well this year against what we had budgeted. But you will note there the improvements, so local road improvements, road to zero, walking and cycling is taking a little bit longer. Now, some of that's not unexpected. So some of that is because you've got to go through design phases, you've got a lot of consultation to do, there's prioritisation of your work programmes, capacity constraints. So we can sometimes see that year one takes a little bit longer to get some of the more complex things beyond maintenance up and running. But I would just, as a bit of a note, it's something to be aware of because we know that this funding doesn't last past the NLTP. So one, we need to make sure that you're all quite clear within your organisations, but also around this table, what is progressing and what's maybe a little bit slow. And are we okay with that? Do we collectively need some advice from our officers on, is there any need to prioritise any of this effort? And how do we do that? And also, if things aren't going to happen, we need to know early because that money can go back in the pot, so to speak. If we're not going to use it here for X, Y, or Z, another area, region can access that funding. So just to kind of provide you with a bit of a flavour of the work that officers are doing, the conversations that they're having at RTAG, but then the kind of advice that we can begin to get up to this group to help inform our discussions.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Is there work that needs to be done to better align our collective decision-making at the beginning of our LTPs and the Waka Kotahi decision-making? Because I understand, and I could have this wrong, that we've potentially had to be sitting, not quite on our hands, but we put money aside in an LTP, we collectively all do, with an intent to be able to get off and do things, but we're working in partnership with Waka Kotahi, so therefore we need to wait for the Waka Kotahi decision making. And we can end up with outcomes like this. And is there anything that we can do to get those decision making a bit closer, more closely aligned? Please.
Two things. So the start of this at NLTP was very challenging, particularly because of the shortfall in funding, and we were very late to make confirmed decisions. I know we have historically been a little bit late, but this one was later than usual because we were seeking the $2 billion worth of additional funding. There is a bigger conversation here on the appetite for central and local government to align those timelines, LTP and the NLTP. There's not been much traction made on that, but I know that we've got a meeting between mayors and the Waka Kotahi board, and this is something that we are keen to explore. But that decision is a ministerial one. It's not a Waka Kotahi one in terms of the timelines, but it's problematic at times.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Linda, is that possibly some of that delay causing some of this lower investment? Because I look, local road improvements were less than 50%, Road to Zero were probably down about a third of what, I mean, I like to see a budget spent within a year. If we've got the money, let's spend it.
I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of the our council partners. My feel is it's probably not a huge impact, but I think it's probably things like capacity, resourcing constraints, other priorities, COVID, that's had more of an impact, but that would be me supposing from what I've heard.
Thank you.
Carry on.
Next one. Our RLTP, significant related activities. Just a couple of things to update on, and actually great work on the Hastings report in here, which covered a couple of them off already on the Maraikako and York roundabout. So the land purchase is confirmed and underway for that. Design of stormwater, landscaping's progressing, and we have just had construction approval, funding for the construction approved late last month. So that can crack on, and that's a really important safety improvement project. The Hastings Bridge strengthening is also progressing really well. They've had 13 bridges now de-restricted, I believe. The remaining bridges are all evaluated, and work will carry on for the remainder of this NLTP. The State Highway 51 safety improvements, they are both at detailed design. When I say both, we've got detailed design and engagement happening on the median wire barriers, but also as well on the Awatoto roundabout. The Awatoto roundabout might take a little bit longer because there's some complex engagement with Kiwi Rail, which is just taking a little bit longer to work its way through. What else have we got there? We have commenced progress on the State Highway 38, the Nature's Road project in Wairoa. So we now have our project team stood up for that, taking a bit of time to get the right people for that project. We've been for a project team drive along, if you like, to actually go and experience the road for ourselves and to meet with some of the communities that are along that section of the state highway. We've had initial engagement with Tūhoe on that, and we're now just formulating the structure to make sure that we have a partner-based approach to setting up the scope for that project. So steady progress, I would say, on that one. No further major updates on any of those. Renewals. So this is for the coming construction season, and the team just wanted to give you a bit of a flavour for what was coming up. We have, again, quite an extensive programme of maintenance happening. Those dots just show you kind of where it's going to happen. We can provide your teams with much more detail on those, but you'll see that there's quite a significant number of kilometres of resale and rehab and renewals happening. We are still ongoing in discussion with the Bayview site. So there'll be some further activity on that one. We're having conversations this week with Higgins about our expectations. I'm happy to have a more detailed conversation outside of the meeting if anybody's got detailed questions about that. But that will be underway shortly. Just noting that probably the most tricky one in this list is the Silky Oaks stretch, just because of how we manage the disruption given the high traffic flows that we've got in that area. So that's something that our collective teams will need to work together on.
It's Links Road.
Yes, yeah. Yes. Needs done, but yes. Okay, speed and infrastructure, an update on this one. And the aim here, as I said in the last one, I'm going to keep bringing this slide up so that we've all got visibility of what's happening, what's planned, what we're doing. But you'll note here that the timelines have shifted a little bit. And we're just working through both the process internally as well as externally for Waka Kotahi when it comes to speed reviews and how we actually approach them. There is an opportunity for 2 smaller sites to be included in the interim speed management plan. And that is, one of those is around the Links Road, State Highway 2, State Highway 50 intersection. One of your MPs in the community group's been quite vocal around that, and we're looking to see how we can bring some of these shorter areas that we have community support for into the interim speed management plan. But for these longer stretches, perhaps a more pragmatic approach in how we do this. So looking at both the timing of them, but as well, are there areas that, let's say in its broadest sense, the community would very much be supportive of looking at a speed reduction? So outside Kura, schools, marae, through towns, rural villages, to work in a more constructive way together to achieve good outcomes for those communities, and then perhaps in time look at what the safe and appropriate speed is for other parts of those state highways. So just to be really open and honest, that's what we're looking at internally, but we've just pushed those timeframes out a little bit to allow us collectively to sort out how we want to do that in the region.
Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Through you. Thank you for that clarity on the timelines of the speed management review. That's very good news. Just talk to me a little bit about how, in the interim speed management plans that you're talking about for those main corridors, who and how are you interacting with where are maybe the areas that you could look at in a one-by-one basis rather than the whole corridor? What does that look like?
That will look like us engaging directly with individual councils and with all councils collectively through this as you develop your interim speed management plans, and then we bring them up into a regional speed management plan. So we do have the interim state highway speed management plan team that are looking at the whole network right across the country, and looking at how we approach those in the short term. We've identified corridors and sections that can progress in the short term, of which none of them are here directly, apart from perhaps that intersection that I mentioned. And then we're looking to sit down and work collectively, constructively, to identify areas that we think we've got support or greater agreement on how we progress them.
Right, thank you.
Linda, sorry, and I'll leave it because this is
This one?
be better
Okay.
discussed here.
So State Highway 5, the programme business case or corridor approach. So just to note that there is a lot happening on this corridor, and what we have proposed through Chair and the Deputy Mayor Hastings is to have a more holistic view of how we approach this. So we have the programme business case looking at the strategic investment required for that whole corridor, alongside the safety improvements that are required, as well as the evaluation of the impact of the speed change. But as well, we need to integrate the maintenance and operations within that too. We have proposed a project structure, steering group and governance structure to help oversee this. And we've had good input as to the membership of that. We have been taking a bit of time to identify the right personnel internally in Waka Kotahi to lead the project. And we have had some feedback on who the independent chair will be that will help us let's say, garner and direct all of the different views that are around the table and the aspirations for State Highway 5.
So Linda, just on that, the steering group and the reference group are yet to be confirmed. We've discussed personnel, but is it yet to sort of be confirmed, or?
We're waiting for the independent chair. So we need our project manager, and we're really resource constrained, I'll be really honest with you, and we want to find the right one for those. Once we have the project manager in place, Jack Hankin, our project sponsor, and the project manager, we'll meet with those that have been put forward for the independent chair, and then we'll be able to stamp it and get on.
Okay.
We have, can I pass over to Sarah, wants to chip in? on this one?
So we've had confirmation this week of a project manager, so, and that, those, that and, program lead will be confirmed on Monday.
Okay.
Did everyone hear that, or do you want me to say
Yeah.
it again?
It's all good.
Now, I've got a question here. Maintenance and operations program.
Yes.
I've been meaning to ask you for some time, I keep, other things come up, but we have had a number of situations of late, some weather-induced, some perhaps not, like the dropout on State Highway 5, the issue with the bridge crossing the Esk River. And there is sort of a community perception that Waka Kotahi is waiting for fires to pop up and then running around with a hose and squirting them out. Does the agency have, for each of those assets, say State Highway 2 to Wairoa, State Highway 5 to Taupō, an asset management plan that has a prospective forecast of where potential maintenance issues are likely to arise and when they're going to be funded? Just how does it work on a prospective rather than sort of reactive basis in that context? Because as I say, the community perception is that it's not being maintained and then just sort of things are getting wrapped on with a Band-Aid after the fact. I'm not trying to be unfair to you, I'm trying to put voices that come to us to you. Give you a chance to respond.
Thank you. And they come very loudly to us as well. I can assure you that we are proactive and we do have a line of sight across all of our assets. For example, the Esk Bridge is one. All of our bridges undergo a full inspection on a 6-yearly basis. Then every 2 years they have routine inspections. And that is to look at structural integrity, and that helps us to inform what the investments require to be over each NLTP. The issue that we have is the size of our assets alongside the funding that we have. And when that funding comes in on an NLTP basis, it comes in 3 years, and all of the country's assets are bidding for that funding, and it then has to be prioritised is the short answer. So no, we do understand the life of the assets and the integrity of them, but it is a case of prioritisation. The challenge that we have currently, and that we've seen probably more so in other parts of the country, like Northland or like in Taranaki, is that where the assets are reaching the end of their life, the rate of degradation under the current levels of use, alongside the weather impacts that are having, we're actually seeing that degradation of the assets occurring faster than was originally projected, which then leads us into how do we begin to reprioritise. So in short, Chair, we do understand that, but we have a lot of assets with limited funding.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Just on the Esk Bridge, once
Yes.
again, speaking for community.
Quite.
If there's going to be significant investment in that bridge, please can there be a thought to a clip-on to allow safe walking and cycling across? Now, I do appreciate there's then another bridge, being the rail bridge, but they have been asking, is this our opportunity to have an attachment? So I'm just going to pass that gently to you. Thank you.
Thank you. I might need to just, in transparency's sake, manage expectations. At the moment, the advice I've been given is that the bridge will be strengthened as opposed to replaced. So, yeah, that's the likelihood.
Clip-ons are great for strength.
My friends may tell me otherwise.
Nice try.
So they have a crack.
I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, carry on.
The dropout update, the great news is that in 51 minutes, the road will be reopened to 2 lanes. It's completed 4 weeks ahead of schedule. The team have done an incredible job, especially as we had some unexpected delays with the telco cable and getting that scheduled to be fixed in time, but they have done an outstanding job. There is a culvert that requires to be relocated that it's got to have an increase in size and the pipe put somewhere else. So we will have Higgins and an abseiling company come in next week to validate the best location in which to move that in. So you will still see some activity happening there, but the road will be back open to two-way traffic at 4 p.m. today, and we'll have the media release was out yesterday. So just to say that the team have done a good job, and we note and we do understand how important that is to your community. And then on all things unexpected, the emergency works update overall. So it's really interesting to hear the update from Central Hawke's Bay as well, the number of slips that they are battling. We've identified and assessed 10 major slip sites on the State Highway. 7 on State Highway 2, the 1 on State Highway 5, 2 on State Highway 38, and then we have a number, is all I would say, on State Highway 35 right up the coast. The vast majority of these have been aggravated by the saturation of the land. It's just been extraordinary. We've got 3 teams at the moment dedicated to working on the designs for the repair of these, so that it's, longer term repairs wherever possible. We have completed already 2 of those. 3 slip sites look more minor improvements, but the one thing, just like we're hearing from yourselves, is that this diverts resources off of other areas of work for us too, so it's quite a fine balance. We have to make sure that the roads are safe and open, but it does slow us down in other areas. And then that's the last one, but you did, and I think Deputy Mayor Kerr did point it out, you did ask for an update on the logging and freight strategic case. Didn't dedicate a slide, just thought I'd do it verbally. So we have done quite a bit of work, and we do have, Lisa is not here specifically to talk about that. Lisa has been leading the development of this strategic case. But we have now collectively with industry and with local government defined the scope of the project. We're prioritising how we manage this kind of activity on both local roads and state highways, how we target funding for maintenance and operations, and how we proactively maintain a level of service, and we need to all define what that level of service is, and explore the ability to enable mode shift where possible. We think as well this is going to provide us with a real opportunity to look at forward planning for our M&O budgets together, for our maintenance budgets, and what we think will be required. And it should help you to anticipate the local share that you may be required to contribute. And as well, at the end of this, we're aiming for it to be hopefully complete in a draft form by the end of this year. Might help us to identify any projects for the next RLTP. We have had 2 investment logic mapping workshops held, one face-to-face and one online through the course of August, which our councils have all been invited to attend. So we can keep you informed, and I might just say if you've got any specific questions, I might pass it over to my esteemed colleague.
Mr. Chair, a question if I may?
Yes, you may.
Thank you, Linda. You say complete by the end of this year. Do you mean this calendar year?
Yes.
Fabulous. Thank you. And the other is the information that comes out, is it possible that it may include recommendations to the government? I'm not asking if there are recommendations, but could an outcome be a recommendation to the government to change, for example, the National Policy Statement on Plantation Forestry? Because
I'm going to look at my colleagues.
For example, at the moment, under the National Policy for Plantation Forestry, there's a very short maximum time that forestry must tell council, local road authorities that they're going to harvest. It doesn't necessarily give local authorities enough time to get in and prep the road, or hand over the road in such a state we can then say to a harvester, you hand it back in this state. So looking at a policy change, within a national policy statement? Is it likely outcome, something like that can effectively be passed to government?
Lisa?
I would.
There we go. So we've gone through a blue sky thinking approach and have formulated 3 problem statements currently. So everything is on the table for consideration. We are well aware of what's within our realm of influence. However, there are some upstream and downstream impacts to our transport system due to things outside of our control. So we are acknowledging that as well. We aren't quite at the point of looking at solutions just yet, as it is setting that strategic context.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Linda. I appreciate you've got a lot on your mind at the moment. I'm grateful for those updates and for being available to answer the many questions we've got. There's the additional set of slides. We've also got that information too. So thank you. We'll let you, if you wish, to get back to what you need to deal with. Please do feel free to take off and do precisely that.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Now, there is now an NZTA update on the emissions reduction plan. Lisa. I've got this in my agenda.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Thank you for having me here today. I'm Lisa Maldi, Regional Principal Transport Planner for the Central North Island with Waka Kotahi, based here locally in the Napier office. And I really just wanted to take the opportunity to ensure that we have consistent messaging across the council officer level as well as elected members. This information is an early signal on the national direction and can help us inform discussions as we begin planning for the next RLTP early next year. So just in looking at the strategic context to start, I want to start with the ASI framework, which is an internationally recognized framework for transport emission reduction. So the focus in the first instance is on avoiding emissions by reducing the need to travel. Secondly is shifting travel to low impact modes. And lastly is improving the efficiency in vehicles. And so just to frame this up a little bit more clearly, the VKT reduction component is primarily focused on the avoiding and shifting components. Improving efficiency of vehicles will also allow us to reduce our transport emissions. However, we don't achieve the co-benefits of improved safety, improved health outcomes, and improved livability. And so the government has set a transport emission reduction target of 41% by 2035. The second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, transport produces approximately 17% of Aotearoa's emissions. 2/3 of transport emissions come from light vehicle fleets. That's your private driving vehicles. So these 3 points are the focus areas for which we'll focus on reducing our transport emissions. To get in a little more detail on number 1, which is the area where local government can have the most impact, is we're talking about integration of land use planning, development and transport planning and investments to reduce transport emissions, investigate other pricing and demand management tools such as parking pricing, and also understanding that roadway expansion and investment in new highways will need to be consistent with the transport targets. So what that essentially means is that investment decision-making going forward will need to acknowledge any increase in VKT and transport emissions. So what does this mean for Hawke's Bay? I just wanted to frame this up a bit to paint the picture of what's coming in the next few years. So there's plenty of opportunities through various projects across the region to start integrating this thinking into our work going forward. So firstly, there's a regional VKT reduction targets that will be set by the Ministry of Transport around the end of the year. Those discussions are currently underway. Streets for People obviously is a great way of demonstrating and trialing new ways of moving people about. The PT review and the public transport plan are looking at a significant step change. So those obviously getting us heading in the right direction as well. And then as we start heading into 2023, we will have a revised national mode shift plan published. For those of you who may be familiar with it, Keeping Cities Moving is our current mode shift plan, and there will be the addition of that VKT reduction component. So looking at it through a national lens, that will be completed by the end of June. And then there's a few other pieces of work that we can influence as well, heading into the next RLTP. And then by 2024, we will have the light VKT reduction programs for the Tier 2 urban areas. This includes the Napier-Hastings area. And so we envision the urban center focus plans to be developed in collaboration with councils through an evidence-based and co-designed process. And each council will know the interventions that will be best suited for their areas. And so it makes complete sense for us to work in partnership with those councils to understand what that plan might look like going forward. So something to kind of paint the picture is that everyone will be doing their part. The colors might not come through great in this slide. However, you can see quite significant VKT reduction targets across the major centers. Tier 2 cities will be doing their part as well. New Plymouth is looking at a 12% VKT reduction by 2035. Palmerston North and Napier-Hastings both looking at a 16% VKT reduction by 2035.
Ask you a question on that. Where did that 16% come from? Because I saw that reference in a workshop last week.
Yeah, so
It's in the ERP, is it? Or is it?
this is the direction from the Ministry of Transport to align our targets to achieve that.
The overall 41%.
The overall emission reduction targets. I believe what they did was they took in consideration growth and the trend for VKT, which continues to increase, and then dispersing that across the various centers based on the built environment, the amenity, the transport services that are on the ground currently. So what this means is that people will need to consider traveling differently for some trips some of the time. This is not a binary conversation of an all or nothing. There are little changes that each one of us can make along the way to do our part. This does include rural communities, particularly those who have reasonable amount of population commuting into those centers. We need to be sure that they have access to walking and cycling for local trips and PT for those larger trips.
So Lisa, you speak of Hastings. In this context, is it Hastings the city or is it Hastings the district?
It is actually Napier-Hastings combined. They combined are a Tier 2.
Urban centres.
So just the urban centres, or?
I would have to pull up that map.
I'm trying to understand because.
I believe it was the territorial authority boundaries.
It's a problem.
So, well, there is an acknowledgement, and again, it's not equal distribution of these shifts, because obviously the built environment is quite different in those more populated areas versus rural communities. And so, again, it is doing your part when possible, changing some of those trips, and also just ensuring that we have a supportive built environment. So there's walking and cycling connections and the PT services.
So the reason I ask that is it comes right back to the spatial plan. Hawke's Bay spatial plan. Where do we put new houses? Where do we allow new houses to go? Because if there's 5 more houses on my road, there's probably 8 more cars travelling a day, 30 to 50 kilometres one way, versus asking a family in Napier or Hastings to reduce their impact. It's just a good thinking around what this means.
Absolutely, and that's part of why I'm coming to you so early in the process is this is literally the very beginning of this conversation, and it's good food for thought as we continue through these conversations with the regional spatial planning in particular.
Thank you.
So, this requires us to not only progress the quick and easy wins, we're pretty fortunate in Hawke's Bay because we have benefited from the model communities investment. We have a pretty good walking and cycling network. However, we will need to roll out measures that are a bit more challenging as time goes on to ensure that we're able to hit those VKT reduction targets. So the great thing is that Hawke's Bay is already taking climate action. Regional Council declared a climate emergency in 2019. There's the creation of the climate change role, the climate action ambassador. The regional carbon footprints will be underway, and also looking forward to a regional climate action plan. So I guess from my perspective, what I envision is this VKT reduction work is really adding a level of granularity in order to achieve these climate change aspirations. It's really not an add-on or an aside action. It really slots in nicely to the work already underway. And to build on that.
Lisa, can I just ask a question on that previous slide? The way that the work that's happening in the region feeds into the national reduction targets that you just put up. So you put up a graph there that showed reduction targets that have been set from a national level down. That 2022 Q3 regional carbon footprint report, is that being developed bottom up, or is that and does it align, or is it something completely different?
I don't know that I can speak to that. Maybe the regional council team can. However, usually when carbon footprinting is done, you identify your baseline year, and then you start working forward from there and understanding what kind of reduction you need to achieve and what actions are required.
Yeah, I can possibly answer that. We had a presentation from CIPA last week, our climate change ambassador, and there is a proposal to develop an emissions reduction plan at regional level.
Yeah.
And I've got lots of questions in my mind about how all the different parts of the system, local authorities, this committee, fit in with all of this in terms of our responsibilities to implement the national emissions reduction plan. It's a very foggy space to me, albeit there is a very bright and intense light in terms of the objective that we need to achieve. So yeah, I'm listening, and but that will be my question: is how what does this committee do within all of that?
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may. These targets, so Hastings Napier, 12% reduction over 16% reduction. How widely socialised is that with our councils? Because rightly or wrongly, I don't recall seeing this before. Yep. So how widely socialised is it with our councils? Do our mayor and chief executives know about it? Is it something that's going to be produced as a media release to the community? And once again, my apologies if it has and I've missed it.
That's all right. So the Ministry of Transport has engaged with councils so far. Again, this being a government target and work from that level. I know that some of your council officers were involved in that conversation. We have had conversations with some of the mayors. I can't speak to whether all of the mayors have been included.
I'll just jump in. So we have, there definitely was, I'm sure JAG was on it, for example, a call where all officers, and then there was a technical level follow-up discussion for more detail. Individual councils were then able to ask for one-on-one sessions. So Lisa and I attended one, was that yesterday? With New Plymouth District Council. Their mayor had some very specific questions. So you are able to engage as a group, but also directly with MOT if you have questions.
Lovely, thank you. So I'll speak with our team, I'll speak with Jan. Thank you.
No worries. And so just to build on that, Napier has a position statement on climate change with a number of objectives around emission reduction. And Hastings also has its eco-district strategy, which really focuses on active transport, efficient vehicle fleet, and enabling alternative transport options within the region. So this work actually lines up quite nicely. So how do we get there? This is kind of where we are right now. Many of you would have heard about the Transport Choices package that came and went in a very quick few weeks. So that was a rapid rollout of on-the-ground walking, cycling, and public transport infrastructure measures, acknowledging that we need to have as much of a supportive environment to begin with in order to encourage that mode shift before we get into the more difficult stuff. The second bullet point, the 22.5 million, that is for VKT reduction planning. That does include that urban center focused VKT reduction planning process, as well as potentially resourcing that work. There is an understanding that we can't have targets and just say, go for it. We do need to be partners in this process together. So that's why this 1.5 billion, looking at a variety of measures from looking at decarbonizing the public transport fleet to the scrap and replace scheme. There's also investigation into the decarbonizing of freight transport. All of these go, work together as a comprehensive package to really tackle that transport emission reduction target. I should also note, this is the first emission reduction plan, and this is also the first round of the climate emergency response funding. So while this is the first time you may have heard of it, it probably won't be the last time. This will continue to be an ongoing conversation. Our regional teams will continue to pass on information as it becomes available, and we'll work with council to better understand what implementation of this work looks like on the ground, because I'm sure there's plenty of questions. And as Linda mentioned, we're more than happy to talk further offline about any specific questions you might have. I do just want to point to the great work that came through the Hawke's Bay DHB travel plan. That's actually a great example of how this can work on the ground in a provincial community, achieving that 18% mode shift in just 2 years through that comprehensive package of measures. So we have an evidence-based program right here in our own backyard that we can look to.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, look, I was just so excited to see this presentation, Lisa, because of the reasons I've shared. We had Robin Gwynn and Margaret come in saying, where are you all coming from? And I guess I was a bit forthright with them, but there is a lot in our minds as councils and real ambition to get on board with implementation of the ERP. What do you see as the role of this committee? Because I have in mind, there's been talk about changing the terms of reference for active transport, who participates from the local authorities. I had in mind that perhaps we would be taking the lead on transport-related emission reduction priorities and actions. What do you think? What do we do as opposed to the councils do in their own right? Where do you see that?
Yeah, thanks for the tricky question.
Did you ever think about it?
I mean, on a personal note, at an officer level, I think actually you're doing a lot of the right things. That discussion that you just had on the active transport being reflected at the table here as well as at the tag level, Kitty and I have been talking for a long period of time about this because we do need to think holistically about the transport system and how we can move people rather than modes. And so I think that there's a few opportunities, particularly when we get into the regional spatial planning work. I think that's going to be critical because it is an opportunity to look at that integration long-term and really understand where we can create those centers and make it easier for people to move about by other modes of travel, even more so than it already is. And so, yeah, I think that those projects in the pipeline are kind of the ways that we can be looking at it in the upcoming next few years. But also looking at the RLTP, there is an opportunity to be a bit bolder. The current RLTP is great. However, I think the actions that we're looking at going forward are probably going to really push the dial as far as trying to achieve those outcomes.
And we can now be more presumably quantified.
Yep.
And saying that we're going to have VKT by 16%. And it looks like, Councillor Kerr, that it is the tier 2 urban areas that need to achieve that. And, specific emission reduction targets, because Hastings has done an emissions budget. And Hawke's Bay needs to do one. But once you've got those metrics, you can start putting the metrics that we couldn't put in our last RLTP.
Right.
If we didn't know what our starting point was.
Yeah, and the early discussions on the National VKT reduction planning is really looking at those metrics and the measures and how are we consistent and how we quantify this? And also looking at the evidence base that we have to ensure that what's in that national plan really has the data and the backing to show that it's proven effectiveness.
Thank you. Well, look, I think we should probably break for afternoon tea. We've got 2 items of the agenda still to do. It's maybe a 5-minute break to grab a cup of tea and hit stop, and back to the table for verbal advisories and the public excluded. Is that okay? Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Yeah, now, we better wait for Peter. Can't operate without my governance manager.
Secretariat.
We're on.
We're on. Well, look, I think we better wait for the governance lead to rejoin us. As a matter of meeting safety. Record.
What did they win?
Josh, is Peter out there at all?
Oh, wow. But it was only. Say, well played. Oh, there's no way.
For rejoining, we have as our next week, there were no minor items on the agenda, so verbal advisory representative report. Have we got anyone from Port of Napier here?
Tony Mills.
No,
No,
not
Tony.
Port of Napier.
Napier Port?
While you're waiting, is there anyone from NZ Rail, please?
Look, it's actually, in all fairness, it was incumbent on me as a follow-up item to have a meeting with KiwiRail to try and get them to this table. I think there has been a conversation with KiwiRail that someone shared with me recently, Katie.
Yeah, so I had a meeting with Paul Ashton, who was meant to be our advisory member in November last year, and also at that time asked them to, if they would be present at these meetings, but I believe his role has since changed, but he is still the member, so I'm not sure whether perhaps his capacity has changed and that might be part of our follow-up.
I just think it's so important with the issues our community are raising.
We've got an issue,
Yes.
a safety issue of an island that's going in the middle of Bridge Street down by the tobacco company. Waka Kotahi have agreed to it, our council's agreed to it. Our officers have been put onto 3 different people. One agreed to it and then said he couldn't from rail. Second one said, oh no, you need to go to someone else. And Tony Mills just said to me, he's just getting the runaround. So I feel if we had one of them here, we could probably put that on him because this needs to be done and it's just not good enough.
All right, well, I think, I'm not sure if I've got the powers of the Commission Inquiries Act to issue a witness summons as such to said Mr. Ashton, but I do think that once the dust is perhaps settled on the transport plan, the transport manager and I should be writing to KiwiRail to make sure that they are here for the next triennium and perhaps to meet with them prior. There was an action equally on me, but we most definitely need to have that stakeholder in the room.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. I think Ian's gone AA. Paul, you're here for AA. Do you wish to share anything with us?
Oh, you're muted.
No.
Oh.
I just read your lips. You said, is that working? The answer is no. You think it's his end? So you can clearly hear us. All right.
He's turning it on and off, he's trying.
We haven't activated.
The
Apparently the
speaker's on?
issue's at your end.
I can,
Ian, perhaps Tony or Sean or Jag?
Sean, could you speak to see if you're working?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Sure can.
Yeah, so it's definitely Paul, it's you for some reason. Okay. Was there something you wish to share or raise with us?
There was.
language is an option.
Could you send us an email after the meeting with what?
Hey.
Hey,
Hi, Paul.
We can hear
That
you.
is miraculously good. Fire away.
Is that better or not?
That's all good.
Perfect.
Great.
Can you hear us?
Go,
He can't hear.
can't hear us.
speak.
I'm not, okay, sorry about that. Does that work now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. It's, my computer's not picking up the microphone, unfortunately. Hey, look, actually, a couple of things. One is just to acknowledge Linda, really, and to thank her for her time. We met with the AA Council, met with Linda recently, and we went through some issues around the NOC contract, local road maintenance, wire ropes that were down, and some construction projects that seem to be taking for a long time. So presented Linda with a letter, and we're just waiting on a reply from that. But we do want to say thank you for her time the other day.
Thank you very much. It was a really constructive meeting, and must extend thanks to my colleague Jack Hankin, who was there as well. And just to reinforce, we are really keen to meet with you regularly. It was a good first start, so thank you.
Yeah, no, that's appreciated. Hey, just in regards to, I don't know whether I could jump in or not in regards to the public transport plan, but there was a comment made or a question made initially, actually, around giving buses right away. I've got my gut feeling on that is that it would take a lot of public education for that to happen to avoid potential accidents. I just think maybe as a starting point, there might need to be some education around common courtesy. Our driver behaviour has absolutely deteriorated, as we all probably know. But just giving the buses some courtesy and allowing them back into the traffic flow, I wonder if that's probably a first step.
Yeah. Very pragmatic.
Yeah. And the other comment I had was around the lady, I can't remember what her name was now, the lady with a disability. I thought she presented really, really well, and she made one key point, and that is that bus stops should be at key facilities, and the one she mentioned was the Clive swimming pool. So there's no reason why the bus can't turn into the Clive swimming pool complex and have an internal bus stop in there. So I think that we need to look at that and look at the key facilities and then arrange bus stops that are actually located right next to the facility. So that was probably one of my other key points that I picked up. Otherwise, been a long day, productive day, and I think you guys have done well. So thank you.
Thank you for your patience in attending. All right, well, I think that's us on verbal advisory representative reports. So I now wish to move, if someone would second the motion, that we go into public excluded to discuss the Bayview Whirinaki Cycleway project closure. Thank you. That's moved and seconded. All in favour?
Aye.
Anyone against? No? Right, carried. We're in. If we could...